After e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and d4, the Scotch game is on the board. So as mentioned in the previous videos, we have to take the pawn in d4. And now in this video, we're going to go through the Scotch Gambit. So white gives up the pawn in d4 for the development of the bishop. This is a very strong attack, very dangerous, and you have to know exactly what to do in order not to lose quickly at least. But once you survive the opening, you're going to be just fine. The move now is bishop to c5, putting extra protection to the pawn, but most importantly, developing the bishop, because we want to be able to castle this king as soon as possible. If we don't, we'll be in huge trouble. You cannot really play typically a move like knight f6 in such positions because e5 is really annoying. It's really strong, and that's the whole point of the Scotch Gambit. You're going to have to move the knight again, and you don't really have anywhere to go with the knight that makes sense. So let's go back a move. Okay, after bishop c5, there's many ways to continue. We're going to go through c3, because c3 is the best move by white. Not only the engine and the theorist choice, but also it's the logical choice. As you can tell, the pawn is willing to take the in d4 with an attack on the bishop. White will have two pawns in the center. You're going to have to move again, and white is just better, much better. And obviously, the white player hopes that you will take, and then white can develop the knight as well. The development of the white is almost completely over. But before we go through c3, let's go through a few mistakes that you might be scared of. So for example, here you're already looking at bishop f7 and what happens next. Okay, let's look at it just to prove to you that there's nothing. Bishop takes, king takes, and after knight to g5, check, you go to f8. There's already nothing here. If you're worried about queen f3, check, okay, knight f6, you're up a piece, there's nothing. After knight e5, queen e7 for instance, h6, you can kick the knight. All of these moves are perfectly safe to play, and there is no checks. White is simply done a piece. And even a move like queen to h5 here threatening f7 is just not a problem. You can play knight to h6 is the best move because it protects the square h6. And the idea is to play queen e8 and force a swap of queens. Of course, the queen will move again, but then you carry on with the game. You got ideas like queen g6. Well, and then simply go on with the game. You're up a piece. If white does this check, it does nothing. Check, you have to take the pawn, and after queen takes bishop with check, queen blocks, you're still up a piece, completely winning. Okay, so let's go through another line where white will do some sort of right lever attack, which everyone is always scared about for some reason. So pawn takes in d4, bishop c4, and now we set bishop c5. Okay, what happens after the immediate knight to g5? Okay, you just simply block it like this, knight h6, and you've got nothing to worry. Plenty of options we're going to look at now. Let's start, for example, from knight takes in f7 anyway. The reason is that after knight takes back, now queen to h5 targets the checkmate square and the bishop in c5. So this actually looks good, but one key move here needs to be played. Bishop b4 check. And obviously, if you get to swap a bishop for a white piece, then you can just castle, and you're going to have a rook and a king defending the knight, which means you're out of danger. And also queen f6 will probably do the job soon enough. So this bishop is important for the white player. So we're going to assume that white will play c3 now, keeping the threat on f7 with the checkmate, queen takes f7, and also attacking a minor piece with a pawn. Okay, black now ignores that and castles. So the white player will be able to recapture the piece. So this looks like a very interesting line. Pawn takes the bishop. How are we doing here? Black is actually winning because knight takes b4 comes with a deadly threat of winning a rook. And remember, here there's absolutely nothing to worry for black. So the best move by white now is knight to a3, stopping knight c2. Obviously, bishop b3 is not a good option to stop the knight going to c2 because you want to develop pieces. But if that happens, you continue like this. Knight d3 check. And when the king moves, well, obviously you can't go to f1 because then you'd be dropping a piece. Knight takes bishop with an attack on the other bishop. So after king e2, well, either way, you're going to take the bishop. So rook takes back. And how to continue now? You might say white has some initiative, but think about it, it's not completely true. Black goes on with b6, the idea of giving a check with the bishop from a6. And black is up a pawn, and it's also a passed pawn, so that's your strength. B6 also has another purpose of protecting c5. When you push c5, could be an idea of supporting the extra pawn. You've got a majority already on the queen side. So here two options. Let's say, for example, the king wants to get some safety, maybe king f1 and king g1. Then in that case, you play bishop b7 and target this pawn. The knight will have, let's say white will have to develop pieces. There's nothing here for white. Black is already got a good advantage. Knight to a3 you can't play because bishop takes e4 is completely safe to play. So after knight to d2 develop, the knight protects the pawn. Black plays c5. So that's what we're going to be doing. That's why black is winning. We have this very good pawn chain and the passed pawn. So there's nothing to do for white. If white tries to swap the bishop in order to get a more active queen and then finally be able to play something like knight f3 or maybe knight to c4, well, simply g6, get rid of the queen. And after queen goes to h3, swap bishops, pawn takes back, and now queen to g5, targeting the knight and the pawn as well. Black's got an advantage of around -4, just in case you didn't realize that. So let's move on to the other option. In this position, we went through king f1 and so on. What happens after the more aggressive knight to d2? The idea of getting the pieces to play, because white still dreams of continuing the attack, but the attack is expired anyway. Bishop a6 check. And after the knight blocks in c4, this is what we're going to be looking at. As soon as the king gets some safety, white keeps improving the position. That's basically the point of it. However, queen to f6 is the most accurate move. We're going to be exploiting this pin in c4. If white now tries to get some safety for the king, king f1 by any other square, anyway, knight to e5, the knight is pinned, so you don't have to worry. And we got enough of attack. We also have an attack on f2. And we're going to be focusing on the passed pawn and building this good chain. King can't really move to g1, for example, because obviously you've got this threat, queen takes, and after king takes back, the knight is free to be taken because white only has one defender and we have another attacker. The rook can't move away because of the background quickness. And in this position you might argue what happens after queen f3, defending f2 a little bit further, and then planning to get some safety for the king. Well, you play queen h6. And now king f1 is met by queen takes h2, unnecessary by white to allow this to happen. And even if the queen goes to g3, protecting a little bit everything, then c6 is the key move. In this case you have an idea of playing d5 and win exploiting this pin. And even if the king were to go to e1, I'm pinning the knight because d5 was going to be too strong a threat to meet. Black's best move is king to h8. And here, look, you're going to continue the game from here. You're going to figure out by yourself. The position is already almost evaluated -5. So clearly you have this very strong majority on the queen side. You should be able to produce a pass pawn, another pass pawn, extra pass pawn for the endgame. You already have one. And the opponent king is clearly misplaced. The queen is stuck. She can't move without losing pawn on the king side and also allowing the infiltration of our queen. This rook in a1 is not playing, whereas black's development of the rook is very smooth. And the opponent king is not really safe at all. So let's move on to the other line. In this position, after the early knight to g5, the thread lever idea on f7, we say we meet it with knight h6. And we're going through this crazy line, knight f7, knight takes, and now queen h5, targeting f7, the checkmate, and also c5. So here bishop b4 check is crucial, and after the only move that takes back the material for white, now you can castle, and after giving up the bishop, obviously knight to b4 making a threat, we mentioned that the best move is knight to a3. Either way, black now plays d5, crucial move to unpin the knight in f7, to release our light square bishop, and also the queen. Here there is no counterplay for black, like for example bishop d2, giving up this bishop for an attack on this knight and the attack on the rook and quicker development, simply because queen to e7. And now we're protecting the knight, and if white takes the knight we can take back with check, so that loses. And now obviously the white bishop can't really get safe in c2 because knight d3 and going back, like, I don't know, bishop to f1, because in b5 you can attack it with the pawn, in e2 you can attack it with the pawn, so bishop to f1, but I think that's completely unnecessary, and it also leaves the pawn in e4 unguarded. So after queen e7, black is better. So now what happens after d5? Okay, plenty of things. What happens after pawn takes back? Okay, now knight to d6, the knight is finally unpinned and the bishop will have to move. Let's say if bishop b3, then you got the same thing happening, knight to d3 check, and also you have rook f2 that comes afterwards, or knight f2. You have plenty of ideas. Depends on what white does, but again, the position is evaluated around -4 or -5. And even if the white player defends the bishop with queen to e2, well, that's even worse because rook e8, right? You're winning the game. Well, bishop will have to block, but you're still winning quite a lot of material. So in this position, what happens after the more solid looking move? Bishop takes d5, keeping the pin. Well, okay, first of all, we take the right to castle away from our opponent with knight to d3 check, and after king moves, the knight goes back to b4. And you may argue, well, did this really work? Because white can just play rook e1 and then castle manually. Well, the thing is that as soon as we get to move this knight in f7, the rook becomes very strong with the cooperation of the knight. This is how it works. Rook e1, for instance. Well, rook f1, for example, you may argue to defend the pawn in f2 a little bit further. The thing is that white loses the possibility to castle even manually, right? That king is never gonna get safe. And in which case you can take the bishop, and after, well, of course, taking back the pawn is just worse because then you can open, got rook e8. You open the files, and this is not gonna be any good for the white king. So after queen takes, you have the thematic queen h4 targeting this pawn and planning rook d8. So let's look at this type of idea from this line. Rook to e1 with the idea of castling manually. Okay, now you take the bishop, and either taking with the pawn or with the queen, everything loses. Let's say if you take the pawn, then g6 attacking the queen is a key move to keep attacking d5. Remember, this is a passed pawn, it's a very strong pawn. So the queen moves, let's say queen to f3, but there was nowhere else because in h4, g5, g5 there's a knight, h4 there's a queen, h3 there's a bishop, g4 there's a bishop as well, e5 there's a knight, so here there's knight or a king. So the queen goes to f3, knight to d6 comes now. This is completely winning. These are all forced moves. There's no coming back from here. Right now, the queen has to move again because of the attack of the rook. And whatever she goes, let's say queen to g3, for instance, but it doesn't matter. Knight e4 with this attack is super strong. It's also an attack on the queen. And even if the queen had gone somewhere else, let's say queen to d3, well, now queen to f6 is the key move, threatening to go to f2. And after f3, let's see, does this work? Of course, queen f3 is not possible because you can give a check and then the rook attacks the queen. So after f3, you may argue that now the access to these squares is completely blocked. Also because rook f1, then you have idea of playing rook knight e4. And well, f3 is going to come anyway. So after f3, how do we take it from here? Rook check, king moves, rook swap, king takes, all forced moves. Bishop f5 attacking the queen. And of course the queen can't go anywhere on the same file of the king because rook e8 will be protected by the knight and will be winning the game. Queen d1, for instance, doesn't do much difference wherever you want to place it because rook e8 now development is complete. We have equal material, but we have a passed pawn, white doesn't, and also the development of the white pieces is worse. So king f1, now queen to h4, the thematic move, threatening to infiltrate and also threatening to play rook check in case the king moves away. So you got this option of rook check in case white moves a pawn. Then you can, let's say, h3. Well, obviously this gives you bishop d3 check, and now you're winning material. If the queen moves, you got rook to e1, ending the game. If the king moves, then you can still play rook e1, and you're completely winning. In this position, you may argue, what happens if white tries to avoid all of that mess and plays queen takes in d5? Okay, we're back to something very similar that mentioned before. Queen to h4, infiltrating in f2, preparing something like even king to h8. It depends on what white does. You can move the knight away, the rook and the queen will be putting pressure on f2, but after h3, stopping the infiltration of the queen, rook to d8 attacking the queen has to move. Whatever she moves, you can take in e4, for instance. If she goes, for example, to b3, you also have this idea. d3 check, the rook is protecting the pawn. Where's the king going to go? If the king moves away, you've got this move which wins a piece. So if the king goes to d1 to put extra defense over the square in d2, then queen takes pawn in f2. This is getting really bad, and d2 now becomes a terrific threat. Knight c4 doesn't stop it to put extra defense, simply because you will play bishop e6, pinning the knight. Potentially you may want to even take the knight if you prefer. It's up to you. D5, D2 is coming. So I guess we can finally move on. Let's do from the start. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, and now D4. You take it, and now bishop C4. And as mentioned, you play bishop C5. So in the early fried liver attack, knight G5, you play knight to H6. We went through knight takes F7. What happens after the immediate queen to H5, putting triple pressure over F7? Okay, you defend it more with queen to F7, nothing to worry. And after castling, black simply plays knight E5, attacking the bishop. We want to take that bishop, and then it's going to be just easy to, I mean, the attack is already neutralized. If bishop to B3, keeping the pin. A5 attacking the bishop. A4 will be trapping so the bishop. So after A4, obviously stopping that. Now D6, and black is planning to play bishop to G4. Obviously, if this is stopped by H3, then you're gonna play bishop to D7 and castle long. You have many defenders over F7, so you don't have to worry. And after that happens, then you can just start pushing the pawns on the king side. You have a good advantage of -2 already. So in this position, what happens after F4, attacking the knight up? Here you just play bishop G4, right? It's very obvious. The only move would be queen to H4. But now knight to G6, attacking the queen once again. And after queen to G3, D3, check by the bishop. And it looks like black is under pressure in this position here with the pieces so cramped in our territory, but actually we're doing just fine. White is actually in huge trouble. And now, obviously, king to H1, black is going to win material. Bishop to E2, the only way to save the exchange is rook to E1. Now knight to G4 threatening, knight to F2, or even bishop to F2, depends on how much material you want to win. So after knight to H3, defending the square F2 a little bit further, H5, and the best thing to do for white now is to take the bishop and give up the exchange, because if white does anything else, like pawn takes in D3, well, it's too late now for white. H4 wins material. The queen got nowhere to go. So in this position, you might argue what happens after bishop to E3, developing a piece and getting out of all that trouble. Now the stunning move, knight to F5, forking these two, completely careless that the pawn in E4 is attacking. So now there's double attack on the bishop in E3, right? So white has to take. And now queen takes E3 with check. And after queen takes, bishop takes with check, king H1. Now we can take the pawn in F4. And black is completely winning, although it doesn't look like it. But we have the bishop pair, and white is backwards with development. Here there's nothing with, there's no attack. If you think about it, bishop to F7 check, you play king to D7, and it's one of those positions where you're threatening. There's nothing here. Let's say, for example, okay, bishop E6 cannot be played because you got another defender, which is the bishop, so knight just takes. And if pawn takes back, then yeah, it's check, but you got a bishop as well. And take back with the knight doesn't help because the pawn, you can sacrifice the bishop even, and black is winning because the knight will be unguarded afterwards. In this position, if instead of the bishop check, obviously you want to play pawn takes in D3, and now finally you don't have to worry about the passed pawn anymore. You can keep developing, play maybe the rook somewhere, you can keep developing, but still look at our bishops. These rooks can never even play. Where is the A1 rook gonna go? Well, anyway, you can take the pawn in F5 now. You are much better. And after G3, attacking the knight, trying to reduce the pressure. Also because, well, because you see this is now a skewer, because if the knight moves, then the rook can take our bishop. That's why we have to counterattack. So H6 is the best move now, and when they take our piece, we can take back. We have a better rook now. Besides, we're about to create another passed pawn. This cannot be taken. Well, let's say if white takes it, because otherwise, if we get to create another passed pawn plus B4, then these two pawns will be the end of the game. Black can now play bishop to D3, and wherever the rook moves, you got bishop threat in E4, deadly. So that's going to be the end of this line. This position we went to bishop takes in F7. What happens after knight takes? You play the thematic rook to F8. Nothing to worry. The knight doesn't have any checks or anything. The knight goes back. The knight goes back to G5, and now black takes the rook in F5. So that pawn that white took just allowed us to develop the rook. So I always remember this thematic situation. So let's move on to the next line. Let's make a recap. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, and now we take. Bishop c4, the Scotch Gambit is happening, bishop to c5. So we're going through that fried liver idea, knight g5. Obviously, don't worry guys, because I'm going to be showing c3 as soon as possible. There's a lot to talk about there, that's the main move. But knight g5 is the move that is the most hated by chess players, all the way from rating 0 to, I will say, 2000 even. So let's see how to neutralize all the possible attacks, because there are just so many. It's a nightmare. But once we know how to do it, we'll be okay. Knight to h6 is the move now, remember. One of the moves that we were probably arguing about now here is bishop to f7 now. Okay, how? Knight to f7, obviously. Knight takes back, king takes back. We're up a piece, but then queen to h5. Queen attacks the king and the bishop. So it looks like white is actually okay here. Black goes on with g6, and after giving up the bishop, now we play d5. This cannot be ignored because we're about to win a central pawn, and our king is completely safe. There are no checks, even after the queen will go to c4. Afterwards, maybe you can just develop the bishop to e6. So there are no checks, no threats, nothing for white, because the only thing that white has developed is the queen. We actually have a king that is, let's say, castled, because you're going to play rook e8 at some point. So this king is kind of, you're going to have to hang around your own castle. It's definitely not a very safe castle, but also white has no pieces developed, so you're safe. So we're threatening to do that. What happens if white takes the pawn? Well, then rook e8 check. That's going to be too late for white to come back from this. King f1 gives us the possibility to swap queens. Queen takes back, and then knight takes back with an attack on a d5 pawn that will be taken no matter what. Or if white doesn't swap, then you've got ideas of checkmate. If bishop to d2, then you can still infiltrate and then checkmate anyway. So after king to d1, rook to e5 does the job. It pins the pawn, so the pawn is not really attacking the knight anymore, because otherwise rook takes queen. After queen to a3, for instance, queen to d5, there's just nothing for, even if the queen hadn't gone to a3, either way, queen to d5, there's nothing for white. Yeah, we're equal material, but we have a great advantage of development. White only developed the queen. We are 2 steps away from doing a bishop f5, rook e8. White can't really move without so many tactics appearing for black. Okay, so in this position, we went through everything. Knight f7, bishop f7, queen h5, all of these moves. Let's go through queen f3 now. Threatening this. Okay, this is the easiest one to neutralize. You just play knight e5. You're attacking these two, and you're also defending knight f7. I think this knight e5 moves really proves that the knight is the strongest piece on the board, if you had any doubt about it. After the best move, queen to b3, saving the queen and keep putting pressure on f7. Either way, a5 comes now, the idea of a4. So if f4 comes to misplace the knight, a4, attack the queen, and the queen will have to go, and not only have to waste the tempo of the queen once again, but you also lose, the queen is losing this bishop forever. Because if queen to b5 protecting the bishop and also attacking this bishop, then b6 wins, because now the bishop is protected and you're threatening bishop a6, which means that the queen will have to try and go somewhere. Oh, by the way, there's nowhere to go for the queen is trapped if the bishop goes. So the only thing left to do for white now is to try and win material back, like taking the knight. And now after c6, that's the best move. Because you see, if you play bishop a6 in this situation after white has taken the knight in e5, then the white player will have won a knight and also a rook and a bishop. It's a little bit too much. So c6 is the move to play. And now the queen will have to take our bishop as well. And we have a good advantage, very good advantage to keep playing this game. We're going to castle soon, nothing to worry. Position is -4, more or less, so you're fine. In this position, what happens after a4? Stopping the entire a4 attack, and now planning to play maybe f4 for real. Black castles. Now we're safe from any possible danger. And after f4, now we finally take the bishop. Queen takes back, and now b6, thematic move to protect the bishop in this type of game. So let's go on with development. Knight to a3. It looks like maybe the white player will be able to play this game, but actually no, because he's compromised. c6 comes now, with the idea of d5. So after bishop develops and d5, white doesn't make it in time to castle long. Even if we wanted to castle short, we were going to play these moves anyway. Pawn takes, and now pawn takes again. We're doubling up and isolating our own pawns for a good reason. the attack has started. So after queen goes back to d3, of course e2 was not possible because rook e8, so we're going to play rook e8 anyway. Now check, king moves, and now bishop to f5 attacks the queen, continuing development. Queen going to b3, well, for example, you can just play knight to g4, threatening f2. I mean, look, position has been evaluated -5 or -6 for a long time now. If queen had gone instead to f1, trying to protect f2 a little bit further, knight g4 comes anyway, and the idea now, if black were to play again, would be d3. You can do everything you want, knight f2, rook e2, it's beautiful. And if h3 attacking the knight, it's a little bit too late now to be able to play d3. So knight e3 and then check, you're attacking the queen, so bishop has to take. But now you got this, and yeah, -6 or -7 in this position. I think we're all satisfied. We can move on. So back in this position, once again, we went through, after knight h6, we went through all of the moves. We didn't go through castle. It deserves a quick mention. Of course, the castle looks like a very natural move, and so it's not like something that just needs to be mentioned, but rather be very deeply analyzed. In this case, no, because the white player just did the Fred lever attack, and we're learning how to neutralize it. Because if white wants to play a move like castling, which he just did, and go on with normal development, then the whole idea of knight g5 is complete. It's just to be considered a waste of time. Why would you play knight g5? Knight g5 is for an attack. You gotta know how to neutralize that attack. But if that white gives up the aggressive approach, then that's not an attack anymore. Black now plays the thematic knight e5 attacking the bishop, and after bishop b3, castle. You see, the move, the white player castling just allowed black to take over completely. After bishop f4, let's look at this move, developing. So that's what we're focusing on. d6. Of course, we'd be really happy to play a pawn in e5 and reuniting the pawns, and white is not going to give us the bishop pair. Either way, after c3, best move, black continues with bishop to g4, attacking the queen, and after queen to d2, d3 is a passed pawn. All of these moves were forced, unless black wanted to give up some material even more. A move like h3 here is met by bishop to e2. This is thematic, we've encountered it already. And after rook to e1, queen to e7 now. And look, white can't move a thing. Queen can't move anywhere. Wherever she goes, she gets taken. Maybe c1, but there's no point in playing that. The knight can't develop except to a3. The bishop can't move anywhere. Well, it can go to e1, d1. But even then, if it goes to... I mean, if white now plays knight to a3, you have the thematic a5 with a4 and so on. If white bishop goes straight away to e2 to get rid of this powerful bishop, you take. And after rook takes, you've got the knight defending this pawn. So white can never take that pawn. And now here black plays f6. And, well, you should be able to play a move like knight to c4, attacking the queen. And when the queen takes the pawn in d3, you can play knight to b2, forking the queen and the rook. It's completely winning. If white takes the knight, then obviously you can take back. And now the knight will have to move. But then you can defend the pawn with the rooks. Black is completely winning. So here we mentioned knight a3, but now a5. What happens after these moves that look logical? Knight to c4, trying to undermine the control of the center of the black player, especially because of the passed pawn. Here we play a4 attacking the bishop, and of course knight takes e5 is not possible because you can take back and the pawn will attack the bishop in a4 just like the pawn will keep attacking the bishop in b3. So that's not possible. Now after a4 the bishop will be forced to move, but then you can take the knight for free in c4. So that cannot be played. What happens if instead of knight to c4, white takes the bishop first? Okay, we take back, and after bishop to d1 challenging our very strong bishop, queen to f6 comes now, putting pressure on f2, and this cannot be stopped because the pawn is pinned, the pawn in f2, and the rook can't go to f1 without losing material, that means the exchange. So bishop e2, then you can take in f2, you're completely winning. If the knight goes to f3, it looks like everything's fine for the moment, but you can now play queen to b6, and now you got double attack again, and you're winning material. So for example, bishop takes, you just take. King moves, and now you take. Rook takes back. Either way, you're going to take, and you're up the exchange. You're winning this endgame. And in this position, if instead of bishop takes, you play knight to c4, attacking the queen, again, take. King moves, and here you take the rook because it comes with an attack on the queen, so you don't have to worry about your queen, because at the end of the whole calculation, you're up a piece. obviously queen takes, then right now if queen takes, then queen to g6, save your queen for the moment, you're still up the exchange. And if instead the knight had taken whilst keeping attack on the queen here, then queen to f2, so it's the same thing, you're winning material, you are up material.